By the way, there are already like 4 times that I want to follow up on stuff that I'm not going to for both of our sake.
I got you, best friend. I got you.
That was Jim Jackson, and this is On the Bench with Mike Hall. That's me. There is a reason for a decade and a half I have constantly referred to Jim Jackson, on and off air, as my best friend. Because I figure if I say it enough, it might come true. Who wouldn't want to be besties with him? Jim Jackson was an absolute basketball star. A 2-time All-American at Ohio State. He is one of only 2 guys ever to win the Big Ten Player of the Year award twice. He just recently became an inductee into the College Basketball Hall of Fame. After Columbus, he went on to play 14 years in the NBA with a dozen different teams. He joined us at the Big Ten Network for the launch back in 2007 and stayed with us until 2015 when Fox came calling. While he was here, he got to call games his son Trey played in when Trey laced him up at Wisconsin. Here's what it's like to know Jim personally. Years ago, I asked him for a favor. My buddy was a huge 1990s NBA fan, and his 30th birthday was coming up. I thought he'd get a kick out of a Jim Jackson autographed picture, maybe. So I asked Jim if that was something he could do. 2 days later, a box showed up for me. Jim found a retro jersey of his and signed that instead and shipped it to me so I could give it to my buddy. That's the Jim Jackson I know. And if you ask around, he was that kind and fun to everyone, no matter their status at work or in life. And on top of all his talent and decency, if you saw the 2 of us together, you'd say, it's clear one of you is 12 years older. But you wouldn't point at him. It's with that in mind that I started by asking him, what magic potion did he find that prevents him from aging, and can I have some?
Yeah, you can. 2 things. Cigars. Okay. And I'm going to explain why. Cigars and either a nice scotch or a rum.
Uh-huh.
And the reason why cigars is because it's something like if you're a wine drinker, it's something about the whole process of, going on a wine tour and understanding how it's processed and made and finally goes from seed to bottle. Okay.
Yeah.
Just appreciating that whole process. Well, it's the same thing like cigars, going from the actual planting of the tobacco to the point of aging the tobacco, to the fermentation, and then watching someone kind of roll and put the leaves together, and then you smoking it. Finally, you taking it out the box or package and you clip it and you cut it. That whole process to me is just a pressure release valve, a calmness. It brings a calmness. And when you smoke a cigar, whether you're with friends or by yourself, it's just a peace of mind. So whatever stresses you're going through and everything, I'm always able to have a cigar just kind of decompress.
Yeah.
Put everything in its place,
Now, hypothetically, what if someone is, not a manly man, and whenever they've had cigars, it hasn't been a good situation for them?
See, that's a personal problem that I'm not going to say is you, but just say it was you. It happened to be you. And we're talking third person, not necessarily.
Yep.
You got to learn how to smoke and enjoy the cigar. You don't inhale it. It's almost like, go back to wine, when you're tasting all these different wines where you kind of just taste, swish it around in your mouth and then kind of spit it out just so you can get all the aromas and the flavors. That's what you do with a cigar. Yeah. It's in here, allow it to sit and just blow it out.
Yeah.
You like to inhale, so I don't know. What I mean? So that's why you having an issue with it, man.
I took my senior year in college, I took a 1-week intensive course. It was called restaurant maintenance, but it was a garbage course. It was just, it was different wine. It was different wine tasting every day. Ooh. So for 1 week, they would bring in a different type of wine and you had a bucket and you were supposed to swish it out. And it was none of us were smart enough to actually do that. So
right.
at 10 in the morning, we were all
Yeah, See, that's what you do with cigars. You know you're not supposed to hell, but you do. See,
right? You'd think I would have learned from being 21 and making mistakes.
Yeah,
But no.
yeah.
This isn't about me. This is about you. You are entrenched in Big Ten lore because of your time at Ohio State. How close were you to ever going somewhere that wasn't Ohio State?
Oh, really close. I actually, when I was growing up, I mean, I was an Ohio State fan from the fact that two guys from Toledo that I knew. Now, Calvin Ramsey was older. I was only like 9 years old when he played at Ohio State, but he was from Toledo. But more recently, when I was growing up, Dennis Hobson was like a big time player from Toledo that ended up going to Ohio State. So I followed him, of course, went down and took some visits, but I never really followed Ohio State basketball like that. I mean, I was a really big fan of the Big East. So when I broke down my colleges, it was like Syracuse, North Carolina, Georgetown, and then Ohio State. So I never, Ohio State wasn't like at the top of the list, but Gary Williams was there, Dennis Hobson Jr. senior year, and Hobson was like the second leading scorer in the country. And then Gary started to recruit like a Treg Lee, who was a McDonald's All-American from Ohio, Mark Baker from Ohio, and then Perry Carter from DC was a McDonald's. So he started to build this different culture of basketball. And Chris Gent started being more competitive. And then, some mentors of mine were like, Jimmy, you can go anywhere you want, and hopefully you have a career NBA playing after you go to college. But being from Ohio, being part of a rebuilding of the basketball program is long-term success, the alumni base, blah, blah, all this stuff. At 18, you kind of know what that means, but you don't.
Right.
But I thought it was really great, an opportunity for me to be a part of something special. Like at North Carolina, Syracuse, if you make it, you're a part of a big group. You know what I mean? Now, don't get me wrong. It has its benefits being associated with those schools. But what we were able to do at Ohio State kind of stands out at that particular time. And that's what kind of drew me into going. And I tell you what, Mike, it was probably one of the best decisions ever made in my life was staying home and going to Ohio State.
So what was recruitment like back then?
Ooh, archaic, probably compared to what it is now. I mean, I didn't know. I mean, I took it's funny, I only took 2 visits, on-campus visits. I had some, like I went to Michigan for a football game, Notre Dame at one time. I'm trying to think, where else did I go? But my official visits were Syracuse, because Kenny Anderson and I at the time were number 1, number 2 in the country. And we wanted to go to the same school, so we took our visit at the same time. And then Ohio State was my other official visit. And then after Ohio State one, I just canceled my North Carolina, some other ones. I said, this is it. This is where I want to go.
So was it the campus? Was it Gary? Like what?
All of it. Jerry Francis, who was there at the time, was the person that looked out for me. And boy, man, I had such a great time. He didn't. He had to pay for it at practice for showing me a good time. I'm in the stands watching practice. He's out there breathing hard, no sleep, just up, and I'm dying laughing, right? And he just kept looking at me up there. I said, I had such a great time. And I just saw, I guess, a change. I wouldn't say a change because I didn't know any better, but it was just like this momentum was rolling with the program. Now, Gary ended up leaving when I got there, and Coach Randy Ayers took over. It's funny, years later, Gary and I, when we worked together at Big Ten Network, we were talking. I said, Gary, let me ask you a question, man. I mean, congratulations, you won a national championship at Maryland. That was great. I said, but I wasn't good enough for you to stay at Ohio State. And he just busted out laughing. But that was it, man. I mean, I just, how you go somewhere, you just feel it, whatever it is. And that's what I felt on my visit.
During the whole recruiting, how many free cars did you get?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is what happened. I pleaded the 5th on grounds that it may incriminate me. No, I was fortunate that I came from a family where I had to work, bro. I mean, I worked all the way through high school with jobs, whether that was cleaning my grade school during the summer.
Like janitor stuff?
Yeah, waxing the floors. That was a program I was in that kind of prepped us for the ACT test. So part of the morning I would clean up and do a lot of work. Then the afternoon I was studying of how to take the test.
Huh.
I worked at a car dealership. I was a caddy. In the wintertime, we shoveled snow, to earn money. In the fall, rake leaves.
Yeah.
So my father just always had, I even worked 3 years when I was in college, 2 years at Dean Witter and 1 year selling furniture at Value City my junior year. So I didn't want for anything. I didn't need anything. So I was never around, the handshakes or the alumni, stuff like that. Would somebody want to give me a pizza or something? Yeah. But
right.
As far as because my father just always taught me that if somebody is going to give you something like that, they're always going to want something in return. That means you owe them. So I never had to worry about that, man.
That's good parenting.
But the car I took finally my sophomore year, I had to pay for it. My father was like, okay, you want to take it? Here's the bill. I said, well, if that's the case, then I'm gonna get the kind of car I want then.
Good parenting, man. Seriously, that's got to be a tough spot if you've got, again, a guy who was one of the uber recruits in the country at that time, but to have your dad having you down the right path, that's a pretty good job by him.
No, it is. It's funny too, because I paid it forward when my son, Trey, he worked all through high school too. Now, the funny part is he was in Toledo with me. A friend of mine ran a McDonald's and he was all excited about working at McDonald's for the summer. Dad, I'm on fries. Dad, I'm moving up. And then later in the summer, he was like, I said, man, what's wrong? He said, I don't really like the job. It's just something. I said, what you don't like about it? He started explaining about it. And then he said, well, Dad, why'd you have me work at McDonald's? I said, now you know what you don't want to do the rest of your life. But until you experience it, and not to say that working at McDonald's is a bad thing, especially if you want to ultimately own your own McDonald's, you got to work. But it just shows you that as you get older, it's certain things you want to do in your life career-wise and certain things you don't. Right. But until you experience these things, I can tell him all he wants. But what my father taught me, I taught my son, and he worked all the way through the same way. And he worked in college a little bit too.
So let me go back to before you're at Ohio State. You're in the 89 McDonald's All-American game with Kenny Anderson, Bobby Hurley, Shaquille O'Neal. What the heck was that like?
You know what's funny? Shaquille, because he was in Texas, and Texas had a rule where if you were in high school, you couldn't really participate in these out-of-state basketball camps. Okay? So the Nikes at the time, the Blue Chips, the 5 Stars, the BC, Shaq wasn't really able to go to. So you heard of Shaq, but he back then AAU wasn't big like it is now.
Right.
So you had to go to these camps to kind of get your rankings and play against the best players. Shaq was never there because he couldn't. So our first glimpse of Shaq was like in a Dapper Dan game. It was a big game in Pittsburgh. And then it was the McDonald's game. Then you saw Shaq. You were like, oh, okay, here we go. But Kenny Anderson had been, the top of the class since he was a freshman.
Yeah.
Out of New York. Of course, Bobby Hurley. Allen Houston played in that game. Tracy Murray. It was, at the time, it was so big to be a McDonald's All-American, especially somebody from Toledo, Ohio. Most of the time, it was the guys in the big cities, the LAs, the Chicagos, the Detroits, the New Yorks. It was this kid from Toledo. Yeah. But it was a moment in my life, a time in my life I would cherish always, man. Those relationships and bonds are still there with a lot of those guys.
Did you get to hang out with a young Shaq? Like, did you get it?
Shaq almost got me kicked out, or he'll tell you that I almost got him kicked out the McDonald's game because we was doing some stuff we should. Because back then it was at Kemper Arena in Kansas City. We ended up going to a Tony Tone concert while we were there. And shenanigans, messing around in the hotel, having people there we shouldn't have, and all this. Almost got kicked out of the McDonald's game, doing teenage dumb stuff.
Yeah.
But we reflect back on that when we see each other a lot and laugh about it.
By the way, there are already like 4 times that I want to follow up on stuff that I'm not going to for both of our sake.
I got you, best friend. I got you.
So if doing the McDonald's All-America game was super cool for, again, a kid from Toledo,
yeah.
Draft night to the NBA had to be, you went 4th overall. Mm-hmm. That night had to be wild. Did you know it was going to be Dallas? Were you still, fingers crossed, maybe you could go 1? Were you just hoping you'd be top 10? Like, what was that night like?
Well, I knew I wasn't going 1. That was Shaq. Okay, everything else was trickle-down effect after that. Was Miami going to take Alonzo? Was Minnesota going to take Tristan Laettner? Was the top 5 going to switch with LaFonso Ellis? But I was pretty much locked in anywhere from 2 to 4. Okay, that was it. So I kind of knew that. It was kind of surreal and disappointing at the same time. Disappointing meaning that up to that point, the draft was in New York City. So that's all you saw was New York, the draft. Well, that year was in Portland. Don't get me wrong, Portland is great, but that's when I should have known my career was going to be about moving, because they moved the draft to Portland the year I get drafted. You know what I mean? And I'm like, it's great, but the lights of New York, Madison Square Garden, that's what you saw. So, but it was kind of like surreal from the fact that you worked so hard to get to a certain point and now it's here. And you don't know how you're going to react because nobody can really prepare you and prep. They can tell you about it. Right. But all of the feelings and emotions, not just for you, but for your family, your friends, the people who mentor you, that were a part of you, all of that gets brought into the equation on draft night when you're kind of sitting there waiting for your name to be. And when your name gets called, it's like, I've completed like one step of that journey. You know what I mean? That process.
Yeah. Was draft night more of a relief or was it more of a joy?
It was a joy, not a relief, because I knew I had work to do. Now the work really has to be done.
Yeah.
To sustain a long career, because nothing's guaranteed after that. I've gotten to the point where I put myself in a position to be drafted. Okay. Now it's the point of what's your longevity in the NBA? What does that mean?
Yeah.
That's when the work, you enjoy it on draft night. Then after that, you got to get to work.
Yeah. Tell me the story about, because you played, in my opinion, in the NBA's heyday. The 90s, to me, there were more Hall of Famers in that stretch of time than any time ever.
Right.
Tell me the story about when you scored 58 against Jordan.
I had 33 though.
Did you really?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Now listen, I've had some battles with Mike, but unfortunately for me, I kind of look at, like, when I came into the league, because I had a holdout, I didn't play against him my rookie year. The next year, he retired. Okay?
Because he was afraid of you.
That's right. Because he was intimidated that, the young Dallas Mavericks would come get him. But he retired. My third year, at the end of the 94-95 season is when he came back. Okay? Yeah. But I got hurt that year. So my 5th year, I finally got a chance to play against him. Okay? But I wasn't the same player because I was coming off an injury. But I got a chance to play against him. And then we've had some battles, man. I mean, when I was in Jersey, the year that I think they won 72 games in 96, 97, we beat them in Jersey. Me and Sam Cassell talking crazy. Sam had 28, I had like 25. We're talking all kinds. Then we go back to Chicago and play them. We're cocky. We're talking, me and Mike going back and forth and throughout the game, and we end up losing. and I'd add 33. Now, mind you, during the game, he's talking, I'm talking, you guard me, you can't guard me, well, you can't guard me, whatever. I know that's Mike, bro. I mean, come on. Mike might have had 28 maybe. But the funny thing about it, after the game, there was a guy named Joe Klein who was on our team who had played with Mike before in Chicago, going through the line. Now, Kendall tells the story, but Kendall tells it all wrong. Gil tells the story all wrong. He just put 10 on the 20, you don't know what he's talking about, because Kendall was on the team. But after the game, Mike and Joe come together, and Joe tells Mike, leave my young fellow alone. You know, no, he said, no, JJ, that's my man. We're real cool, but tell him that's why he's wearing my shoes. Yeah, the ultimate. And I said, yep, you're right. Now I'm not taking them off either. I was wearing Jumpman at the time with Nike. So, but those are the things that, like you said, during the 90s, Akeem, Clyde Drexler, Reggie Miller, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone, Scottie Pippen, Sean Kemp, Gary Payton. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Unreal.
I mean, Chris Mullin, Reggie Miller, Mark Jackson. I mean, it's
amazing.
It's amazing. But here's the thing though, Mike. It's like music. Well, who had the best music? Was it the 80s? Was it the 70s? Was it the 60s? Who had the best hip hop? Was it 80s hip hop, 90s, 2000? Everybody's time period seems like it's the best. Right. And it's always, well, the group behind us, well, you don't know nothing about music. Right. This was really good music. Well, is it necessarily true, or is it just that's a part of our lineage and our history? So the 90s basketball was great. It wasn't like every team was great at the time. We weren't in Dallas. So, but I'm so glad I got a chance to play in that era though.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about trash talking. Whether it was in college or in the NBA, is there a better trash talk moment that you remember than Jordan saying, remember, you're wearing my shoes? Oh,
no. I mean, that was classic. And then we were going at it during the game. Gary Payton was really good. Not that me and GP talked a lot to each other, but you can hear him through the course of the game. Okay?
Right.
But Gary was at the top of the list, bro. Gary would go all day just talking. I don't care what it is. He was going.
Do you is trash talking something you can learn? Like, is it something you just kind of see other guys and you pick it up? Is it something that's kind of inside you, or is it something that your teammates at one point say, hey, if you're going to go up against him, you need to this, that, and the other?
No. Here's the thing. It's a difference between a guy that knows how to trash talk and somebody that's corny. Somebody that's kind of doing it just to do it. The trash talk got to be authentic. You can tell when somebody has been doing trash talking and been around it for a long time, or it's different between somebody just saying something.
Yeah.
It's a big difference. And a lot of times the trash talk comes from playing in the playground, in the park, or whatever it is. You pick up on these little things. You know what I mean? Man, yeah. You can't go. I don't care what you do. You can't guard me. You soft, wherever it may be. Some guys just know how to do it. And Gary Payton was one of the best. I talk trash, but only if it was provoked. Right. You know what I mean? But some guys did it just to get under your skin, to see if you can handle it, to see if you can respond. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. You mentioned 12 was the amount of teams that you played. Yeah. Why can't you commit, Jim? I mean, what a typical man. Like, commit to a franchise.
Commitment issues. I got commitment issues, man. You know? I never thought, nobody thinks that you go to play that you're going to end up on multiple teams. You think the team you start with is where you're going to end.
Right.
But now, I was traded, but I also was a free agent 4 or 5 times where I chose to go to another team. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like I was just traded. No, it was times where I had an opportunity to look at something different. I will say this though. I'm in the record books. That's one good thing. I'm in the record books, but it taught me a lot about life, Mike, in regards to those that can adjust to their environments or those who survive.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's very easy to fall off the map when you're traded a bunch of times. And kind of lose a sense of who you are, lose the love for the game. And then next thing you know, your career could be over. You're not in the league anymore. At the end of the day, I still had a job to do, whether I liked being traded or chose to go to a different team or not. I still had a job to do. I had to be a pro. And then being able to make the adjustment to a new team, new teammates, new system, new philosophy, and still be pretty much successful in that says a lot about an individual's ability to adapt and then survive. Yeah. And the back part of it is I got a chance to live in some great cities, meet some great contacts, and have some great long-lasting friendships with probably individual players, coaches that I never probably would have met or had time to spend with intimately. So once you change the mindset and think about the benefits more so than the disappointments or the not having the stability, so to speak, but the benefits of traveling, new friends, new opportunities, make the most of your time, then you view it a lot differently.
Right.
And it took me a minute, but once I got it, I said, you know what? I got to change my mindset on how I see this. It's not a negative, it's a positive. Maybe not in the short term sometimes, but in the long term, it pays off.
Oh, as a learning experience, 12 different cities, 12 different head coaches, 12 different organizations. There's so much information you probably could have just been a sponge on about how different things get done. That's, I think, pretty cool.
Well, yeah, you get a chance. It's like you work for a corporation. You know, Mike, you got a chance. You were at ESPN and now Big Ten. Now, that's only a small snippet, but you got a chance to see how ESPN worked compared to working with Fox and Big Ten. So you brought some of that from ESPN over to Fox, but you learned more over here. Well, it's the same thing with me, is that I got a chance to see how, now the court is still 94 feet, basket is still 10 feet high. Right. Most of the plays you're running are about the same, right? But it's the philosophies on how an organization works, how coaches think, how players think and work together, still the game of basketball, but the philosophies, the different philosophies that you are able to tap into are, fantastic life learning lessons.
Totally. Yeah. Well, speaking of, it was LA was your last team, right?
Yeah.
I remember in doing some research, I found a quote from you in an LA paper on why you chose to retire. And you said, quote, when you have an opportunity to work with someone like Mike Hall, you jump at it and you leave everything in the past behind you.
Bro, you weren't even at the time. You were still, did you win what was it that you won at ESPN?
Dream Job.
Dream Job. You didn't win that yet, did you?
That was 04.
Oh, that was 04 when you won that?
Yeah.
Who'd you pay off? There's no way you actually won that.
I paid.
No way.
Stuart Scott and I had a Chicago bond, and he was like, "I'm just going to put you in the fast."
No, I believe you worked your magic on the backside. I really, you bribed somebody or something.
Again. See, this is where you could follow up and get me in trouble, but we're not going to let that happen.
Not going to let it happen, right? Okay.
What do you were the first 8 years with the Big Ten Network. What do you remember about the very beginning of the network?
You remember how many people we had that were different analysts? We had so many, because at the time, you didn't know who was who. Right. So you just put a room full of color commentators and studio analysts together and kind of filtered out how many games or how many studio appearances each person to do. So it wasn't like you were getting reps, but not like the reps we got later on.
Right.
And it was so many different people. And that was my first introduction to really serious broadcasts. I had done radio shows. I'd done ESPN with Roy Firestone and all of that. I'd done TNT with the playoffs. With the playoffs before, but not focused in on this. And it was more challenging because it was college. I've been away from college basketball. Once you get in the league, you follow it especially your university, but not like deeply.
Right.
So I had to get back in trench with that and just learn what it meant to be a broadcaster. And man, I'm telling you, man, it was exciting, new. It was, what's the word I'm looking for? It was kind of like, I didn't know what to expect, at all. It was, oh man, I think about those times, man. Oh,
good times.
Great times.
Do you remember the show that you and I did called Hoops on Campus?
Oh, we had a ball with that. Yes, we used to go, yes. We go in early, find some students, and think of some storylines to talk about.
Yeah.
Hold on, remember we had the trophy?
Yeah.
We had the trophies that we gave out to some of the students, to participants.
Super. We did like dunk contests.
Yep.
That was a fun, like, weird, different show. Like I look back on that and I'm quite happy of the
I mean, but at that time we were trying to figure out who we were too as a network.
Right.
You know what I mean? Trying to experiment on all these different things on what would bring some kind of new exciting nuance to the game itself. Like when we went into Northwestern, we did something totally different than what we did at Penn State or wherever or other place was at. You know what I mean? With the students.
Totally. What do you think your legacy will be most tied to? Your Big Ten Network Barbasol commercial? or your Big Ten Network Motorist Insurance Group commercial?
Hey, listen, if Tom Weinhardt over at Michigan tell you, who's the head of their what's the word of sports information?
Sure, the SID.
He always sends me the Barbasol stuff. I don't care what it is. I don't care how he does it. He always sends me a picture of Barbasol or a clip of the commercial or something. It is hilarious, man. I mean, motorists, I love them because they're both from corporate corporate headquarters are in Ohio.
Yeah.
But the Barbasol one, Tom would not. He will always I'm doing a random game now. He just sends me something with Barbasol on it.
You filmed both of them at the Big Ten Network.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being there and like walking past and seeing like all these lights and stuff. And I'm like, we're a professional television network. And they added all these lights and stuff. And you're just sitting there like, hey, what's going on? Barbasol here and there. And
hey, let me tell you how that Barbasol, though, a friend of mine who owned it, okay, they had reached out to me. We talked about doing the commercial with them, but they wanted to do something like me on a basketball court running and jumping and dunking. I said, bro, I'm not doing that. I'm too old. I said, but why don't we do it at the studio? Like I'm getting ready to go on air. I got to get, makeup and shaved up and clean. So I actually came up with the concept of doing it at the studio in Chiquita's room, like the first part, and then going on the stage to do the rest, which was great.
Yeah.
Chiquita's room was where everything happened. Everything went down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never. And the stuff that Barbasol decorated the room with, she got to keep after that. Some of the furniture, some of the stuff. So
yeah,
it paid off.
Do you remember the tagline from the Motorist Insurance Group with Jim Jackson commercial? You know us.
You know, because Archie Griffin was the first one that did it. Okay? So you had to say, you know us.
Once you did that, every time you and I hosted a show together, I would introduce us. Hi, I'm from Chicago, and blah, blah, blah is the name of our show. Jim Jackson, my call. You know us.
You know us. Oh, great times, man.
Okay. So before you go, we're going to do a final segment called Before You Go. 4 questions unrelated to anything whatsoever.
Okay.
Number 1, best part about sitting next to Gus Johnson for 2 hours that nobody knows. I'll give you what Joel Klatt told me when I asked him.
Right.
And it's different basketball versus football. But
Yeah.
he said his football spotter is his hype man. So
Oh, no, Scotty. Oh, yeah.
He said, like, in the booth, he's like pumping up and going crazy, and Gus feeds off of that and brings his energy from that. And I was like, you would never know that because the camera's never on Scotty.
That's right. Now, basketball is not as much, but I think sitting next to Gus during a game, probably the most interesting part is that Gus can, I don't know what it is about a Gus effect, but you start to see it brewing, and he starts to get into it. Like, when the game starts to get tight, you can't see it on camera, but in his body language and his demeanor changes when he starts to really get into the game. And you gotta match that energy, because he's so intense into that part of it. Then all of a sudden this big moment happens, and you just kind of sit back and let him do his thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he loves to munch during the game, I can tell you that. He'll have some little snacks and stuff like that right by there in between breaks or a timeout, pop. I don't care what it is. I got to keep the pretzels away from him because he'll spill mustard on himself. So we got to get rid of that.
That's perfect. All right, number 2. And this is a long question, but I have to preface it with that because you are one of the kindest people I've ever met. And you have this amazing ability you would treat Gus the same way you would treat me, the same way you would treat a producer, the same way you would treat a makeup artist or a janitor, or if Scottie Pippen walked in. Like, you would treat everyone the same. When I reached out to our longtime researcher, Harold, I was like, anything you want me to ask Jim for the podcast? He was like, no, I just can't get over how great he is. He always treated me with respect and kindness like I was anybody important to him. So all that is a preface to say, I think you have your life put together. You have life figured out. So if someone's going to ask you for life advice, what would you say to them?
That you're never as big as the next person. I don't care who you are, what status in life you have, how much money you have. What may make you better than a person maybe is some of the things you do in your community compared to somebody else. But that doesn't mean that you have superiority over somebody. You always treat people the right way. Oh, I don't care who they are. And I learned that early from my parents, and probably humbly growing up in Toledo, is that person that may be working at McDonald's, may be a janitor, may be working at the hotel, you don't think they have dreams and aspirations and desires? And a lot of times they are invisible to people that actually enter their lives or enter their workplace. So they're just there. And to me, it's just treating people the right way, no matter what your lot in life is, who you may be, celebrity, non-celebrity, whatever it is. And that karma comes back to you. And not that you're doing it to get something back in return. Right. But that's just decency, common respect, and appreciating the next person for whatever they do. And I've just always been like that, man. Always.
Well, you follow that advice well, so that's why I wanted to ask you that. Number 3, you mentioned at the top, I didn't know you were going to bring it up, but you did. You have a greater love of cigars than anyone I've ever known. When we would do shows and it would get off air, we'd be taking our make off. I'd be like, what are you doing? You're going, I'm going to blah, blah. This is cigar place in Chicago. And that's what you love to do. Where did that start?
My mentor. So Ron Harper, when he played for the Bulls, so I would go, when I was with the Mavericks, we weren't going to the playoffs at the time. So I would go to Chicago during their second three-peat. And I would stay with Ron during the playoff run, championship run, and they were smoking cigars at the time. So that's where I picked up this great habit, was being around the Bulls in the mid-90s. And then as I got into it more and started to learn more about it, I got more intrigued about what it's like a subculture. Like, yeah. I would travel, Mike, wherever I travel, I always try to find a cigar bar. I don't care where it's at. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, bro. Found me a couple of nice ones. I don't care where I'm at. Sometimes during my games, when I'm on the road, I would prep my stuff at a cigar bar. But it's just now it's part of my lifestyle, man. It's part of my lifestyle, bro.
And finally, number 4, you are a widely respected national sportscaster. You played in the NBA for years. You're a legend in college basketball. For the world to hear, simply put, Jim Jackson, out of everyone you've met in your life, who's your best friend?
My best friend or my best friend? Which one is it?
The best friend. Your best friend.
My best friend is Mike Hall. Now, are you going to let Howard hear this? Because, now Howard Griffin and now we're going to have to fight.
No.
I think you enjoy playing, both sides against the middle with best friend and bestest friend, or best friend with Howard. So which one is it?
So just to be clear, Jared DiNardo is my best friend. Howard's my best friend, but you're my best friend. You accept?
Hey, at least you're consistent with it, though.
Jim, you're a joy. Thank you, sir.
Come on, bro. Anytime.
So to recap, he once scored 33 against MJ, but Jordan won the post-game trash talking. Gus Johnson likes to munch on snacks during game timeouts. And if you want to look as young as Jim does, it's time you take up cigars. My thanks to Jimmer Jackson for joining me. Heads up, this was our final new guest this first season of On the Bench. Next week, we'll put together a best of episode containing the most excellent moments from this past season. Be sure to check that out. That'll do it for this episode. From the Big Ten Network in Chicago, I'm Mike Hall. We'll see you next week.